And I'm going to put it on speaker view and see if that works. And turn it over to Anne.
All right, I don't see any mute.
Sorry, I forgot to mute everybody. I'll just start.
Okay. All right. And I'm not muted. All right. From coast to coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral territories of all the First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples who have been stewards of this land from time immemorial and who have chosen to share their knowledge and wisdom. I live in BC on the north shore of Greater Vancouver, and I would like to especially thank the Musqueam and the Tsleil-Tooth peoples who have lived in this land from time immemorial. As grant activists, we take this opportunity to commit ourselves to the struggle against the systems of oppression and colonialism that have dispossessed Indigenous peoples of their land and denied their rights to self-determination. This advocacy is essential to human rights work across the world.
Thank you, Anne.
Okay.
Now, I'm going to give you a bit of a context for our webinar, and welcome to Good Nutrition Equals Successful Learners. I have been interested in school meal programs for a long time because I've experienced them as a teacher and as a parent in France, England, South Africa, and Argentina. Some were very successful and others were quite dreadful. All were necessary. According to the excellent document School Meals, a Toolkit for Parliamentarians, school meals can contribute directly to 9 of the 17 development goals: poverty, hunger and all forms of malnutrition, health, education, gender equality, sustainable consumption and production, climate action, peaceful and inclusive societies, and partnerships. Properly designed school meal programs that improve the well-being and education of students can offer returns of between $7 and $35 for each $1 invested. This return on investment is so large because school meals address multiple policy challenges and provides benefits to several sectors, most notably agriculture. Over 388 million children at least 161 countries, 83% of countries globally, receive free or subsidized school meal programs at school, according to the World Food Programme. Canada is the only member of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, without a national school food program. So how does Canada stack up on this issue? According to the 2024 National School Food Policy document, 1 in 4 children in Canada, this is almost unbelievable, live in food insecure households. And that of course, has an impact on their education. According to the Toronto School Board, students who regularly ate breakfast were 17% percentage points more likely to graduate compared to students who did not have breakfast every day. However, there has been some good progress. On April the 16th, 2024, the Canadian government took an historic initiative by announcing an investment of $1 billion over 5 years for a national school food program in the federal budget. The Coalition for Healthy School Food welcomed the announcement, which is the result of decades of grassroots advocacy and 10 years of work. Debbie Field, the national coordinator of the coalition, had hoped to be here. Perhaps we can talk to her another time. Many provinces and territories increased their investments in school food programs to respond to the challenges of rising food costs and higher participation rates in food banks, which have been putting strains on programs across the country. Growing research and awareness of the social and economic benefits of investing in school food has also emerged over this period. Here's what's happening in BC. The government announced $214 million over 3 years to support their new Feeding Futures program. And breaking news, BC is the 10th province to sign on to the National School Food Program, and the government has given $39.4 million in addition to the $214 million that the BC government is going to provide. And the Manitoba government, under Wab Kinew, is investing $30 million annually to develop a universal school food program. So, recent news, however, which makes school feeding programs even more important, is that the federal government has been funding the Hamlet Food Voucher Program to help Inuit communities in Nunavut cover the cost of some of their groceries. However, funding for the program runs out at the end of March. Parliament has been prorogued, and now that we are in an election, plans for further funding remain uncertain. That means starting on April 1st, a few days from now, many Inuit children in Nunavut may go hungry unless there's a concerted effort to institute a school meal program. I've checked recently, yesterday, and there's still no news about that being continued. So our three guests today will help us understand at the local level more about the importance of and the necessity for healthy school feeding programs, both in Africa and here in Canada. Over to you, Sharon.
Thank you. I'm pleased to introduce our first presenter. Fatima da Silva is best known as the driving force behind Nourish Cowichan, a successful initiative to provide an equitable school food program in the Cowichan Valley. Under Fatima's leadership, Nourish Cowichan has become a lifeline for families living with food insecurity. Its ability to pivot and meet the community's demand truly shone and skyrocketed during the pandemic when every school shut down. With her determination, the program expanded its services to reach not just students, but their families as well. Her commitment expands far beyond food school programs. She brings her roots to everything she does. Born and raised in Mozambique, Fatima moved to Portugal in 1985, to Canada in 1987. Her journey brought her to Victoria in 1990, where she lived 10 years, and she finally settled in the Cowichan Valley, which is where she has felt at home for the past 24 years. Her upbringing taught her how important community is, and it shows in her ability to bring people and organizations together to take care of their youth. Currently, under Fatima's guidance, Nourish Cowichan provides school meals to over 2,700 students. Welcome, Fatima.
Thank you very much for inviting me and having me here today. Before I start, I'd like to also acknowledge that I'm joining you from the Cowichan Valley, which is the traditional and ancestral and ceded lands of the Coast Salish and traditional land of Quatsum tribes, which is very much dear to our heart because it's a big part of our everyday life here, where we work, play, and do all our shenanigans, but mostly trying to do the best we can to work with our communities. So thank you again for having me. Our actually program started in 2016. We started the trials. It was October, and it was, I don't know exactly if this was a well plan in my head. I was getting bored because I had 2 restaurants. I closed one, and I have issues that I cannot stay still for a few minutes. So I decided to call a friend who had been telling me about a particular school in the Valley that they had identified many students coming to school without a meal. And you have to remember, I grew up in Africa. It was a little bit of a war zone when I was lived there, and probably still. But during that time I went to school, there was never a time in elementary school growing up in Mozambique that we didn't have a meal in school. There was always meal available. So that did not make any sense to me that in Canada we had schools where kids went to school without a meal. Don't have children, didn't know about the situation. So initially, we just offered school meal programs. So in 2016, in October, we started having the first conversation. This principal was willing to hear from us, and we immediately formed this coalition and started doing trials in this particular school. But something in my head was kind of screaming at me that it wouldn't be possible to be just one school. So we started doing research, visiting more schools in our district, and we realized that wasn't something that was specific to one school, that was spread out through our entire district. And so we went and decided that this was something we needed to do. It was a daunting task to take on. I had to sit with my extended family here and talk about it, because I knew I would not have as much time to be hanging out and have fun with everybody, because the job looked like it was much bigger than I was planning to volunteer for. But we had the connections, we had the expertise to do it. And I grew up in a family that if you know how to do it, there's no reason for you not to do it, especially if it's something in the community. You cannot be complaining about anything if you don't take a step to trying to help. So I got involved with it, and we formed the society, started doing the trials, and the program took off really fast. So remember, our first conversation was October 2016. By November, we're doing trials and register as a society, because suddenly our conversation community, people wanted to donate money, and now none of us wanted to handle the money. We register society, form a board. By December of that same year, we realized, well, a nonprofit side not necessarily can give tax receipt, and we didn't want to have to rely on third-party agreements. So we applied to become a charity organization. I guess the need was quite big, and the federal government go, yes, go do your job. By March, we're full-on charity organization. I'd start the program in one school. By June of that year, what it was supposed to be a trial for one school, we're already in 4 schools. I have an issue of not understanding the word no, and I made everybody speed up and start working. And what happened with that is we're doing all those meals in a tiny kitchen in the restaurant. We only had 2 days that the restaurant was closed, and those are days that we were able to produce, and it wasn't enough. So every day I'll get home and emailing the school district how many more children we're having and joining the program, and the need for a space. So by June of that year, the school district agreed to become a partner and unanimously voted in a 3-minute meeting to give us the space we needed, which was 800 square feet, for us to build the kitchen. So we built the commercial kitchen, didn't have money, but we asked the community, and you'll hear me always advocating for programs that have a community engagement. So we built the kitchen with the support of our community. Every single thing in our kitchen was donated. It was an endeavor that took, we didn't even have money to start building a kitchen. We talked with we found a contractor that thought that we were mad and crazy enough to get it done. The project was going to cost us close to $500,000. We had no money. He took on, said, pay as you go. And if by the end of it, you need to do installments for another 6 months, it was so special for them that were willing to take that risk. And actually were able to pay everything within a month or two of the completion, came under budget because the community rallied on, paid for most, pretty much offer from paint, floors, everything that we needed. And we built probably one of the most beautiful kitchen I have seen, because not just a commercial kitchen, as a dining room, as a sitting area for our volunteers. And it's a place where students drop by, engage with the volunteers, understand what's needed. But one thing that I always try to remind people, that growth, it never happens just with having corporation or government funding. It happens because we called on the community. What we did, we forced this conversation publicly in our community that it needed to be a community engagement. I had no children. It should not be just my responsibility. It should not just be responsibility of the schools. We needed to bring everybody to the table and talk about that poverty. And it was a tough sell because schools didn't want to talk about it. And that was a hard of the few conversation. And we still have a little bit every now and then of pushback, but we still going at it. So moving forward, today, Nourish is in such an amazing position because of all of those voices we brought in into our fold. Yesterday, actually, it was, what's today? I can't even remember which day today is. On Tuesday, we had a last minute visitor, which was the Minister of Education, coming to visit the kitchen, the new Minister of Education. And as we're talking about the project, I was trying to explain to her the level of engagement that we have brought into this organization. And for us, especially for me, lately, I feel like I probably should have a name tag. I'm probably the person, the tour director on a cruise ship with a flag and an entire community walking to do the work. I don't feel like I should get the recognition for a job. We have 80 volunteers with us that show up every single day. So currently we support over 2,700 students in our district. We offer breakfast, lunch, snacks, and a weekend program. The weekend program is being supported also with volunteers from the Rotary Club. We started to do that post-pandemic when most of the organizations had run out of money and we weren't doing the hampers anymore. So we had to continue. We couldn't just leave those families like that. So the weekend program has grown now to over 500 bags of groceries every week. And it's costing us approximately $300,000 now a year, a school year. But that also has been an effort. It is hard for people to understand when they say we don't fundraise anymore. In the past, since the pandemic, this organization has not held a single fundraiser because we couldn't do it publicly. The community has been doing that for us. Everybody's been fundraising for us. When we talk about multiple strains of funding, the Feeding Future and all the government funding accounts only for 1/3 of our budget. This past year, our operating budget was 1.3 million, and only 1/3 of our budget has been coming now from government. The rest comes from community, because there's that level of engagement from everybody to be able to do this job. So when we created this model and we're trying to sell, we always had conversation with Minister of Education what needed to be done. So for this past year, also what happened is we start working with the province, and we're supporting now other districts across the province to trying to figure out how they should do their programs. So we work with 6 districts part-time to help them, and we open another program similar to ours in Port Alberni, which has a similar demographic to ours, and we're running a full program there that has had already an increase of 35% of students since we started in September. And that's what I bring that with me, the way I was raised, the way I grew up in Africa, that we all need to participate. There's zero excuses that we can make not to support our youth. So that's been a passion, something that's grown big. We've been recognized as one of the top school food programs right now in the province. And I really believe that there will be a time that this country will be able to have universal food program. Right now, we're just filling in the gaps. Even with all the funding we hear from government, that is not enough. If you really think about it, it's a huge step from the government to have done that. We've never seen anything like that in the years I have lived here. But it is not enough. If you do the math, you realize 250 million for an entire country, when we have this level of poverty among our youth, it is not enough. So that advocacy needs to continue going. So I am so extremely grateful that you invited me here today. So thank you, all of you, for having me.
Thank you, Fatma. Our next presenter, Gabriele Matheson, visited Rwanda in 2018 on a volunteer assignment where she was introduced to Rogers Kamuli. Rogers volunteered in the rural village of Gashora and invited Gabriele to visit this impoverished village. Gashora was one of the villages that suffered terribly during the genocide, and the effects are still visible. Gabriele met with some of the villagers and with the local weavers who were struggling to sell their baskets in any great numbers. She fell in love with these amazing, resilient people and promised to find a market for their beautiful craft. Gabriele and her husband also committed to funding the renovation of an old rented building into the first preschool and the feeding of the first 83 preschool-age children being supported by the team in Gashora. In 2019, Gabriele started Friends of Gashora, and together with new friends, they not only began selling baskets and textiles at craft fairs and markets, but also began to fundraise for the first preschool. To date, Friends of Gashora have helped to purchase cows, pigs, goats, rabbits, dig wells to support various youth groups such as art, farming, weaving, theater, English club, just to name a few, build 2 preschools and a dormitory for 52 young beneficiaries, a guest house, and new kitchen. In total, they serve over 250 children, all the workers and volunteers daily. So over to you, Gabriele.
Thank you, Sharon. And thank you for everybody for attending, and thank you for inviting me. I don't have to tell you the statistics, you all know them, that malnourished children grow into less productive adults, perpetuating cycles of poverty and dependency that can last generations. This whole problem, of course, in Rwanda is especially large because, you know, it's only 30 years ago that the genocide had happened, and we have added emotional trauma as well as hunger in the rural communities in Rwanda. And we, with Friends of Gashora, with the weavers and sewers and all the other people involved, we work with many young adults that suffer the long-term effects of malnutrition and the difficulties these young people have, you know, are very obvious. So with the team on the ground, we've decided to feed as many children as we can in our preschools, as well as in an after-school feeding program to which any child that's hungry can come. So many street children will show up. I'm not sure if somebody is going to put the photos up that I've sent. Yeah, thank you so much for that. Okay, Great. So the first picture is a picture of a little girl, PC. And okay, and then there's a little girl, a picture of a little girl. Her name is Peace, or PC as we call her. And she's the face of hunger. She sleeps most of the day. So she's lying in a little hut on the ground. I guess that's not the right picture. Anyway, there she is, yes. So PC is severely malnourished and spends most of her days asleep. Not out of peace, despite her name, but to escape the relentless pain of hunger. Too many children around the world, sleep is the only refuge from the reality of hunger. Malnutrition does not just steal their health, but it steals their future. As we know, it stunts them, it impairs their development, and it robs them of their potential. So we just couldn't look away when we became aware of this problem in this village. So Friends of Gashora, decided to help address this problem. And so we started the feeding program in the preschools. So our children are between 2 and 5 years old, rather than waiting till they get to elementary school. That way, we ensure that these children receive the nutrients that they need at exactly the moment that their bodies and brains are developing the fastest. So with proper nutrition, these children enter elementary school ready to learn, thrive, and contribute to their communities. Early intervention, ideally before they hit preschool, is critical. So I'll just tell you a couple of stories. So there's a pictures 3, 4, and 5 of 2 boys. That's the old kitchen, and that's the new kitchen. Okay, so there we have. So I'll tell you the story of Joshua and Jean-Marie. In the early days, we had the after-school feeding program as well as the porridge. We could only afford to give porridge to that many children at that time. So after school, these children would arrive, and this young boy, about 5 years old, Joshua, would come. He would collect his cup of porridge, and then he would have a little sip, and he'd disappear. So after a couple of days, we would follow him, and we would realize that he would go to this little pile of rubble, and a few minutes later, he would emerge again with an empty cup, come back, and so we had a look why he's going into this pile of rubble. And his little brother, who was about 2 or 3 years old, we actually don't know how old his children are, was in there. So he was sharing his cup of porridge with his little brother. So we, needless to say, we brought these children to our home at the time. And fast forward to today, both children, specifically the younger one, seems to have recovered fully. Joshua, the older one, still struggles with emotional issues and stunted growth. But we're hoping that with special intervention, he will catch up eventually. We actually have about 50 young beneficiaries living in our boys' dormitory, and about 24 girls living in the girls' dormitory. They attend school, they attend all our other programs, but mainly they get fed every day and housed. And the thing is, when parents realize that their children will be fed at the school, they're more likely to enroll their children in school. In these rural communities, many children are not sent to school because they needed a home to work the fields or the gardens or whatever. So when they know that they get fed, so they come to school, and of course this increases access to early education and giving these children a head start academically and socially. Teachers, of course, with the feeding program, as has been mentioned earlier, report improved concentration and participation among students. They no longer fall asleep on their desks. And as these children grow, their health and educational achievements, of course, ripple outward, lifting entire families and communities out of poverty. So there is Joshua and Ben, as we call him, Jean-Marie. They're looking healthy and happy. And then just fast forward here. So there's pictures 14, 15, 16, 17. As another example, Ishimwe. Ishimwe is one of the children that we've been sponsoring. So there's another picture, sorry, of Ben, the youngest one, now cooking rice for his brothers. And they're all brothers, of course. And that's before we had the big kitchen. So these kids, of course, all help themselves. But then there's another picture, 14, 15, 16, 17. That's Shimwe. We met her when she was 4 years old. She was a beautiful, extremely shy little girl who carried her little baby sister on her back in the traditional baby wrap and took care of her all day long while her parents went out fishing. And that's a Shimwe. And you can see on the back, she has this little wrap around her and her baby's in the wrap. So, you know, she sort of hung around us and around the school, but she'd often fall asleep under the big tree by the preschool, which she could not attend. And this there's her little sister. So that little baby sister, Chuzo, also suffers from epilepsy and other brain injuries. She will never walk or talk. And we also recently found out she has AIDS, which she contracted during delivery from her mom. So her parents are fishing, but unfortunately the mother suffers from severe PTSD, contracted AIDS during the many rapes during the genocide, and a lot of the money from the fishing goes towards drink. So these two children are under our therapeutic feeding program. So they're getting not just food, but supplements, as well as emotional support. So Ishimwe, which means praise, she kept turning up, and we invited her to come to join the other children to receive a cup of porridge every day. And from then on, so she would come every day, and after the preschool children had left, and she started to play with the other children, because she's actually quite a lonely child. When you have a sibling like her that suffers from epilepsy, epilepsy is still considered a curse under witchcraft. And so people actually don't want to have much to do with that family because they think it's contagious. Anyway, so we played with her, we helped her out. And soon enough, the other children accepted her. And one day, and I'll never forget that day, I saw her sitting with some of the other children, and she laughed. And it was the first time I've ever heard her laugh. And that picture actually is if you find the picture with 4 children sitting in a row, where she's sitting in the middle, there she is. So she's the second one. She's the one in the beige wrap with the baby on her back. And I've never heard her laugh before. And this is our picture, like our advertising picture for Friends of Gashora, because to me, this is the picture of progress, the picture of change. So just after 6 months in our feeding program, the transformation was remarkable. She gained weight, she grew, she had energy to play in the playground, and now she's enrolled in the primary school and is eager to learn. She's continuing to be on the feeding program and the emotional support program, and we hope that she will continue to catch up to her peers. So there's another picture, 19 and 20. So there she is again. That was actually last time I saw her, last year. And she's growing into this lovely little girl, and we're sponsoring her, so we're supporting the whole family. So she's a real success story, and her story is not unique. It is the story of countless children whose lives are forever changed through the access to nutritious meals at a young age. So as I close, I want you to picture this: a classroom full of preschool children, laughing, playing, learning. That's her again. They are strong, they're healthy, and they are full of potential. This is the future Friend of Gashora is hoping to create for all the children in the village, and to ensure that every child has the chance to live a life free from hunger. In addition to providing, of course, just nutritious meals, children that are suffering from malnutrition or severe acute malnutrition require comprehensive care. This includes access to medical treatments for infections and ringworms, and it includes to teach them about proper sanitation, and of course, as I said before, proper therapeutic feeding programs. Aside from our nutritional programs, Friends of Gashora also delivers programs that support emotional and social development. Obviously, children growing up this malnourished have issues at home. Children who have been malnourished require support to develop trust and emotional stability, social skills, and caregivers should always provide a nurturing environment to help rebuild their emotional health. So often we have to help the parents, counsel the parents, especially those that deal with severe trauma from the genocide, whether they're victims or perpetrators. We don't differentiate between the two and help any family that reaches out for support. And of course, Friends of Gashora continues to monitor the children's growth and development to make sure they stay on track. And we have regular follow-ups to assess them and make sure that we catch any other emerging health problems. So there they are. This is one of our pictures. I love this little boy in the front. You see this massive plate of rice with cabbage and beans and a lot of the vegetables we grow on our own farm now. And because we have a lot of goats now and rabbits, so there is some supplementation with some meat. We have a dairy farm, so lots of milk is available. And of course, all the animal manure goes back to the vegetable farm to help fertilize the ground. So we're working to be self-sustaining through a large piggery and dairy farm project. And the guest house also will help to make Friends of Gashora a self-sustaining program. And as Sharon mentioned before, we fundraise by selling hand-woven baskets and hand-sewn textiles. We have about 30 volunteers, and we are always happy to have more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gabrielle. Zoe Boutelier is currently the Education Team Lead and Senior Development Officer at the High Commission of Canada in Mozambique. As Education Team Lead, she's responsible for Canadian investments in the education sector in Mozambique, approximately $20 million Canadian annually. She holds a master's degree in international development and a bachelor degree in biology. In the past, she's worked as a program officer for what is now Nutrition International in Ottawa, and as a senior program officer of global health at the International Development Research Center in Ottawa. Previous to her current position, she worked on the Kenya, Somalia, South Africa desk at the Ottawa headquarters of Global Affairs Canada. Zoe is involved in the Combating Absenteeism and Reducing Barriers to Education Phase 2 project, which focuses on school meals in Mozambique. Zoe?
Thanks so much for the introduction, Sharon. I too have a presentation, so I am going to go through the process of uploading it right now so that you can all see it. Is it visible?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, wonderful. And I wanted to quickly mention too that I have a few colleagues that have joined us for the call today. Sarah Nichols, who is our ambassador here in Maputo, is on the line. I believe my education counterpart, Elsa, is here. And two of my colleagues sitting in Ottawa at Global Affairs Canada headquarters, Megan and Alain, are also on the line. So I just wanted to thank them for being here. I really appreciate the support. And on a personal note, I wanted to let all of you know that I have long been interested in your work. I first heard about your work probably 7 or 8 years ago, and it is a personal goal of mine that when I become a grandmother, I'd like to apply to be a member of your network if you'll have me. So yes, I'm here today to talk about the CARBE project. First of all, though, let's start with the very basics. Where is Mozambique? And I wouldn't fault you if you didn't know exactly where Mozambique is, because it's not a country that is extremely well known in Canada or amongst Canadians. It sits, as you can see on this map, in the bottom southeastern corner of the continent. And it shares borders with a number of other African countries. It borders South Africa, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Malawi, and Tanzania. And it has a 3,000 long kilometer Indian Ocean coastline. So it has abundant natural resources and a lot of stunning natural beauty. You can see in the photo here some turquoise waters, sandy beach, megafauna, and diverse wildlife, lively cities, a melting pot of cultures, and wonderful, kind, talented, smart people who are a joy to be around and a joy to work with. But, you know, all of that said, Mozambique is an extremely low-income country and dealing with a lot of poverty. In the Human Development Index, which ranks 189 countries, Mozambique sits at number 181. So this gives you a bit of a sense of the challenges the country faces. Some of the countries which sit below Mozambique are Yemen, South Sudan, Somalia, Central African Republic. And so some of these statistics paint a picture of what children in parts of this country are facing. It is a country of 33 million people. 73% of children experience anemia. 67% of families live below the poverty line. There's a 38% malnutrition rate, and 30% of people cannot read or write, so are functionally illiterate. And this is in present time. As Sharon already mentioned, the project that I want to discuss today is called Combating Absenteeism and Reducing Barriers to Education. The project phase 1 existed from 2020 to 2025, and it was $20 million over that time. We're about to start phase 2, which will run, and I apologize for the mistake in the slide. Phase 2 will run from 2025 until 2030. So it's another 5 years and another 20 million Canadian dollars. So if you do the math, it means we're spending approximately $4 million a year on the CARBE project. So a central question then that I'd like to try to answer, why are we choosing to invest 4 million Canadian taxpayer dollars a year, $4 million of Canadian development assistance into a school feeding project? What is it about school feeding that makes it such a good investment? And as Gabrielle has already so eloquently described, and as Phyllis has also mentioned in her introductions, it's because school feeding has benefits across multiple areas. It's about a lot more than just the food or just the lunch. It can bring education benefits because it boosts enrollment and it boosts attendance. This is particularly true for girls, and girls in Mozambique particularly, because they're very vulnerable to being kept out of school or removed from school for economic reasons. School feeding brings health benefits. The meals provided by CARBE ensure a basic daily intake of protein, carbohydrates, and vitamins, which are calculated to be about 30% of the required daily intake. And this promotes physical and mental development for children and adolescents. And of course, school feeding brings social benefits. When parents know that their child is going to receive one wholesome meal in the day, it alleviates some of the financial pressures of feeding that child a similar meal at home. And last but not least, there are agricultural benefits for the local community from school feeding. For the CARBE project, local farmers living in the areas surrounding the schools are growing vegetables, fresh vegetables that are purchased by the project to be used in the school meals. So agricultural and livelihood benefits are a key impact of this particular school feeding program. So the specific objectives of CARBE are to provide a daily meal for over 50,000 students, to support the local smallholder farmers who live in the environment of the schools, and then also to offer a number of complementary activities, and these include school gardens, gender dialogue clubs that are held after school, and nutrition education and hygiene education, which is offered not just to the students, but also to the teachers and to the volunteers from the community who cook the school meals. And last but not least, the project is working with local government officials with a long-term view of one day having government officials do a lot of the procurement and a lot of the management of the school feeding programs. Unfortunately, the CARBE project does not cover the entire country of Mozambique. It covers 5 insecure districts inside one province. The province is called Tet province, and it's in the northwest corner of Mozambique. It's a landlocked province, and it's tucked between Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi. It is a very dry province and very hot. It is susceptible to drought anywhere between 6 to 9 months of the year. And there are high levels of food insecurity and malnutrition, even higher than in many other provinces of the country. And CARBE works in 104 schools in Tet province. So again, targeting about 50,000 students in these 104 schools. Here are some statistics of what the CARBE project achieved in 2024. I won't read through all of them. Maybe I will highlight a few. For example, in 2024, the project made and distributed 1,400 menstrual hygiene kits for adolescent girls. It delivered almost 700 nutrition education sessions. It supported 73 school gardens, drilled 7 boreholes at 7 different elementary schools, and helped to construct 20 different kitchen warehouse combinations at schools which didn't have sufficient infrastructure to house some of the perishable and non-perishable foods. This is probably my favorite slide. When Phyllis contacted me about this presentation, Phyllis, you said, what do they eat? You know, what composes the school meal? What does it look like? So this is a photo that shows one example of what a school lunch would look like, and also shows you the menu. And I don't know how visible that is to all of you. The print is pretty small, and I apologize for that. But let me start with some of the numbers. This is just in 2024. In 2024, more than 8.7 million meals were distributed by the CARBE project to 51,000 beneficiaries. So what that means is that each student participating in the program got about 170 meals that year. So almost every day, there's about 195 school years in a calendar year. So almost every day, a student was receiving a school meal through this project. And so the sample weekly menu that is provided here by WFP, who is the implementing organization, it shows on Monday, the meal was a vegetable curry with rice. On Tuesday, a bean stew with veggies and rice. Wednesday, a bean curry with peanuts and shima. Thursday, a bean stew with veggies and shima, and Friday, a vegetable curry with sauteed rice. So you can see that there are some basic components that are reused and recombined in creative ways. Rice, beans, corn flour, fortified vegetable oil is used, as well as iodized salts, which is important, peanuts, and fresh vegetables. And what we see in this menu is a fairly typical Mozambican diet, where beans are your main source of protein. There's not a lot of meat. Meat is something that would be consumed a few times a year, maybe on a holiday or a celebration day. And shima, in case you're wondering, it's a type of porridge or paste that is made from ground cornmeal. It's very common throughout Africa, but known by other names in other countries like ugali or fofo in different countries. But here it's called shima. I'd like to draw your attention to the plate that the meal is served on. If you can see, there's a Canada logo on the plate. There are Canadian logos on a lot of the instruments and tools that are used in the school feeding. And it's a proud moment when you go to the field and you see so many children who are receiving this meal, and you see the Canadian logo. It's a nice, proud, patriotic moment for sure. So the core of the project is the school meals, but there are a number of complementary activities that come alongside the core school meal. And one of them is working with smallholder farmers. So WFP, the World Food Program, who implements this project, is working with almost 400 smallholder local farmers who live in the vicinity of the schools. And as of 2024, approximately half of the fresh vegetables that were used in the school meals were procured locally from smallholder farmers in the direct vicinity. And so the types of vegetables that the farmers are growing You can see in this picture what looks a lot like kale. So it's called cove. It's a bit of a, for me, it's somewhere between kale and spinach. Pumpkin leaves, beans, tomatoes, and onions are the most commonly grown local vegetables that would then appear in the veggie curry and the veggie stew that we saw on the menu. Another of the complementary activities, so there's the school meal, there's working with farmers. Another of the complementary activities are what we call gender dialogue clubs or gender clubs. They're after school clubs that take place after the school day. And it's not just adolescent girls who attend, it can also be adolescent boys. But the idea is that the gender club is a safe space where girls and boys can get together. Sometimes they're separated, sometimes not, but discussing issues such as sexual and reproductive health, gender-based violence, menstrual hygiene management, and so on. So you can see some of the numbers associated with that activity. Almost 300 clubs were created, 2,000 gender dialogue sessions, and almost 1,500 hygiene kits distributed during the gender dialogue clubs. Another of the complementary activities is the food and nutrition education. This is where WFP staff will provide training and mentorship to school teachers, as well as to the volunteer cooks who come from the community, to students and also parents. They will talk about the nutritional content of various foods, how to combine foods to maximize nutritional uptake, hygiene and food preparation, and eating habits. Sometimes it can be as simple as encouraging parents to make sure that their child, if possible, has breakfast before coming to school, because it has a huge impact on energy levels between the time they arrive at school and receive their school meal. And the food and nutrition education happens using theater, using school gardens demonstrations, informal chats, demonstrations, and so on. So as we move into phase 2 of the project, so the next 5 years of the project, a lot of the successful elements of phase 1 will be continued. Of course, the school lunches will continue to be the central feature. We'll continue with the complementary activities, working with farmers, having school gardens, gender dialogue clubs, nutrition education. But we're planning to expand a few elements of the project, chiefly clubs with mothers in the community, to help promote women empowerment and craftsmanship, and involve the mothers when and if possible in local production of menstrual hygiene kits, which then can be used through the gender dialogue clubs. So on behalf of Global Affairs Canada, my colleagues who are on the line, and our implementing partner WFP, who is on the front lines of this project. Also on behalf of all the teachers, the school children, the volunteer cooks, the mothers, the fathers in the community, thank you for wanting to hear about this project and to learn about this project. Thanks for listening, and I'm happy to attempt to answer any questions you might have. Obrigada.
Thank you, Zoe. Now, our question and answer session can begin here, and I see there are a couple of questions in the chat. So Hilda, I'll pass it over to you. Are you there, Hilda?
Sorry.
Mhm.
Okay, how do we make the school lunch program an election issue in Canada? Mr. Trudeau announced a program in Nova Scotia last June. This is from Susan. I'm guessing she's from Nova Scotia. And another question, can you tell us a bit about the type of fundraising you do? And this is from Sharon Graham. What do Canadian food programs look like? That's from Anne Frost. And Tina, how do we measure effectiveness of these programs?
Can you direct one of the questions to one.
Okay.
How about handling the lunches as an election issue, possibly?
Okay, I'm going to ask that for the first presenter because she's from Canada. Or that was
Fatima.
Yep.
Fatima.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
How do we make the school lunches program an election issue in Canada? Mr. Trudeau announced a program in Nova Scotia last June.
Yeah. Has been an issue that's been in the past used quite a bit as an election issue, right? And more than ever, that it is a platform that needs continue to be talked about it, because one of the things that I've learned through this process is never taking anything for granted. And the fact that it took this long for Canada to even address the issue, it is problematic. So we need to figure a way that we approach any school food program in this country something is an essential service. We still, all levels still see that when we engage with the parents, with the teachers, there's still a certain level of being seen as something that is a privilege to feed a child. We forget that it is part of a right to every single child to have a meal. So it needs to become universal. We need to stop talking about or trying to find funding for it and filling up the gaps of waiting lists. It needs to become something that's essential service. We don't talk about it anymore. That is actually, when I presented to the Minister of Finances for the Feeding Future a few years ago, the chair of the committee asked me this question: what will be the dream for us, the dream situation for us in Nourish Cowichan? And my answer to that was, kick me out of the job. And there was silence in the room. I said, kick me out of the job of having a charity organization feeding children in our schools. We're a first world country. It needs to become essential service, a right to food for every single child. It should be always it needs to even stop being a platform. And that is the answer to this. We need to stop talking about actually taking action, and so it becomes a universal food program that's part of the budget, and we stop talking about the need to feed our kids.
Okay, Gabriela, can you tell us about fundraising? You mentioned briefly that you have 30 volunteers selling handicraft. Oh, I'm sorry, Sandra, you had a question. You're muted. Sandra has a hand up, but she's okay.
Okay, I just wanted to comment that the school that my grandchildren attend in Halifax has a school program. It's a Acadian school, elementary school, but they also, my daughter-in-law was complaining, they didn't even ask for donations from the community. They just started the program, and she thought that was kind of odd that they were just putting it in place without getting community support. So, and I don't know how the program started. It's whether it's just that school, but in Canada, we do have the odd, a patchwork of.
Yes, and can I speak a little bit of that? That is something we encounter in our district. In one district, you'll see so many fragmented programs going. And when we start doing the program, that's what we found that was a major problem, because it was quite often run, believe me, you'll know this, quite often grandparents that have come back in and trying to do those programs. So they were fragmented, and depending which school a child went, they will get a program or not. And that was the part for me that was so crucial, of centralizing and having equity for every single child versus being at the roll of the dice. So depending which school you go, your kid gets lunch or breakfast or not, it shouldn't be that way. And we're still seeing that in some of the districts. And that's the reason we're now working with the province, trying to eliminate that every child should have an equitable access to food versus having to be a roll of the dice. It should be centralized in every single district. Every child has access.
Okay. Now I'd like to ask Zoe if she can talk about the effectiveness of the programs.
Certainly.
And also, I'm just wondering, because we're in election mode now, I'm sure you're well aware of that. I'm wondering if a certain party gets in, whether the funding will continue. That's just me being political. Because I know that Mr. Poilievre talked about cutting back on international aid, etc.
Let me start with the effectiveness question. I think a lot of what you're going to measure depends on what your initial intention or what your initial goal was in designing and starting out with the project. And I'll be honest with you, the funds for the CARBE project came from funds that were designated as girls' education funds. So we were really paying attention when we designed CARBE with WFP to girls' education, and particularly in Mozambique, we knew that girls were dropping out of schools earlier than boys, and less than 50% of girls were making it from elementary school to secondary school. So when we first designed CARBE, this is really a focus. This was really the issue, the core key issue that we were trying to address. And so in measuring effectiveness, we were measuring baselines around girls' attendance in school, girls' enrollment in school, and wanting to see concrete improvements in those things. As our involvement in CARBE has become longer, some of the medium-term goals have been around learning outcomes for both boys and girls. So, are we seeing that children are performing better in school in terms of foundational learning, in terms of reading, writing, and basic math skills? And then in the long term, and we're clearly not there yet, but the long-term effectiveness of this program, I think, will be demonstrated when there's a larger amount of local ownership, when the local government and the local schools and perhaps even the national government can take ownership of the sort of patchwork of school feeding programs that are currently happening all throughout the country. And when it becomes a sort of integrated national school feeding system with long-term sustainability that isn't dependent on the contributions of countries like Canada, then I think that is sort of the long-term effectiveness that we would be looking to measure. I believe that the funding for CARBE is solid and will be there for the next 5 years. And I also believe that programming in the area of school feeding, because it has so many benefits in so many areas, that there are health benefits, there are education benefits, there are also economic benefits, livelihood benefits. So depending on the interest of a new government, school feeding is extremely versatile. It can be explained in a number of ways, and it can be shown to contribute to such a large, wide number of goals that personally, I'm not worried about the survival of the CARBE project or of school feeding programs. Because I think also there's a really strong element of common sense. School feeding just seems to resonate with people. Anybody who knows children or has had children or has grandchildren can easily sort of agree with the common sense goal of feeding children and keeping children in school because of school meals. Hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you, definitely. And
Hilda, we have time for one more question, and then we really have to. We're over our time already, so maybe a quick question for Gabriele.
Okay, I was going to ask her about the fundraising part of it. She mentioned selling handicraft. Is that sufficient? Is there any way that she could promote the fundraising by sending us information about it? Could we support that?
Well, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much for that that thought. So yes, we have volunteers. We attend a lot of markets and craft fairs. And to answer your question, no, it's not enough. There's also a program, you know, if you can go on our website, Friends of Gashora, you can see that you can buy a bag of rice and you can support, you know, healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a way to donate money there. But you know, we are basically what we're desperately trying to do is to find other groups to copy what we do in Victoria, which means take the crafts and sell them in their community. You know, either at, you know, Christmas fairs or whatever, and people can come up with their own ideas and contact us. And you know, the more outlets we have, the better it is. We also do actually sell wholesale to some gift stores, and that's working quite well as well. But to answer your question, no, it is not enough. Thanks so much.
Okay, and I'll just give one final wrap up that Bunny put in. In the midst of all the demands on international assistance, where do nutrition and school food programs rank on the list for attention, and how can our advocacy and fundraising work here in Canada effectively help promote these programs and direct more resources to reach more communities? I think that's a good question to ask for us all to think about. It sums up the whole hour. Thank you, Bunny.
Yes. Well, I'm going to ask now if Sharon could give our thanks.
Yes, and well, Fatima, Gabrielle, and Zoe, on behalf of the Grandmothers Advocacy Network, I have the triple honor of saying thank you, thank you, thank you so very much for these wonderful presentations to us today. You've all given us just so much to think about, and your passion, all three of you, your passion just shines through. Thank you so very much. Fatima, you've reminded us that the well-being of children is the responsibility of a community, not just a family, a community. And that is so important for us to remember. And the Nourish Cowichan is a shining example of that community piece. Thank you so much. Gabrielle, you told us incredibly beautiful, poignant stories, which we need to hear. We are always talking about the fact that Gran needs to hear more stories and needs to tell more stories. So thank you for doing that so beautifully for your incredible organization, Friends of Gashora. I think that you also sort of exemplify the old saying, where there's a will, there's a way. I think all three of you do that actually today. Zoe, thank you. You have brought together for us and reminded us that not only education, but so many other things are involved. Well, health and wellness, agricultural, social protection, all those benefits that are provided by good school funding, food program. And in addition to the education piece, those things we need reminding sometimes, even though we know, we need reminding of that. So thank you so much. And also for the small farmer, the fact that they play such a vital role in the program. We have advocated, Gran has advocated strongly recently for our federal government to continue to fund and to hopefully increase funding for smallholder farmers and resilient farming in general. So thank you for that. So just thank you again for these teachings and for your very hard work, your passion, and for your time and willingness to be with us today and to educate us. We appreciate it so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone who attended, and to the Education Committee who've worked so hard for this webinar. And thank you, Janet, for being our Zoom person. I always think that's such an important role, and we should be thanking you too. So happy Thursday, everybody, and have a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.